Chair, Director for Rochills Estate Agents, and today I'm with Claudia Fick, one of the experienced estate agents. And what we want to talk about today is some advice, general guidance for first-time buyers who are looking to buy a property and just the process. So, Claudia, can you explain what the advantages are of preparing for your journey in terms of buying a property?
Sure. So the first thing when you're taking an offer from first-time buyers or anyone with an onward chain is, if your agent hasn't already, is you're going to ask for a copy of the agreement in principle, just to show to your vendor that they are proceedable. We've seen their funds are available for the transaction. Once we have seen that, we will then look to book the survey. Now, the survey is what your bank sets up either as a mortgage valuation, or you'll have the other two tiers, which is a home buyer's valuation or a full structural. This can very much depend on the age of the build you're buying. Once you've got your survey booked, we will then look to ensure that you've instructed your solicitors. Okay, that's one of the first things you do as well. So what I would advise on that is certainly ask your estate agent who they recommend for the conveyancing process. Why we say go with the one they've recommended is they will have had relationships with these conveyancing firms. And this is built on a good service. So although you may find your pay margin higher, you certainly get what you pay for. And these solicitors ultimately, the agent ultimately wants a solicitor who is going to look after the deal and make sure they see it through from conception to birth in a timely manner. Yeah,
because I noticed that often the transactions are quite lengthy. And during that process, there's lots of questions solicitors raise. How does the right solicitor make a difference in terms of that process?
I think with conveyances, in terms of managing the time scales, experience in knowing what questions to ask to assist their client and making sure they have all the answers in maybe one or two back and forths between their buyer or their client and then maybe the vendor's solicitor as well. So I think experience comes into play a lot, and just being very forthcoming and upfront with their client with the inquiries as well.
It's often the case that solicitors raise issues during the transaction. Are there any tips or techniques that you would say the agent could adopt to gather some of the property information questionnaires?
Absolutely. A good agent will already have a basis of knowledge on the property that they've sold. For example, what we have is we do have what we call a PIQ form, a Property Information Questionnaire. That addresses a lot of the buyer's questions first off without having to address that by the solicitor, taking more time to then write to the onward and get those answers back. We can then answer the question straight off from what the vendor's told us directly.
Okay, and what about things such as the location, the area of the property? What would you advise first-time buyers to do before viewing properties, maybe?
What we always say is, especially if we've had a positive viewing on a property, have you driven around the area? Do you know the schools around the area if you have long-term family plans? Are you commuters? Have you done the walk to and from the station to make sure you're comfortable with the daily commute? So we certainly say get to know the area. We recommend going around different times of the day. Evenings, see who your neighbours are, what they like, or maybe on a Saturday morning take a drive through the area, to get an idea of the demographic around you.
Okay. And what about the dreaded offer? Obviously, if they're first-time buyers, sometimes they're quite nervous about the offer. And, would you give any sort of advice and techniques about how they would present an offer to an estate agent, for instance?
Absolutely. I'd say come as prepared as possible. So if you are looking at properties, hopefully you've already spoken to an independent mortgage advisor, or you have a broker, or you've spoken to your bank, meaning you then have an agreement in principle. That would put you in such a better position in comparison to somebody who started their search, i.e. aren't on the market yet, or haven't spoken to anyone in terms of organising their finances. So having your finances in place by putting an offer forward, saying I have an agreement in principle, I can forward this to you if needed once the offer is accepted to confirm the funds are in place and I'm ready to proceed.
Of course, yeah. And I suppose for the vendor who receives the offer, having that background information also enables them to have a better chance of success rate.
Absolutely. It just shows the commitment of that buyer as well, that they've taken all the right steps to make, to have a smooth transaction, as it were, to get things going.
Okay. And what about things such as any conditions of offer and things like that? Would you advise that they actually come up with all that information at the point of offer?
There's certain conditions that are suitable and appropriate. It really depends on what those conditions are of the buyer. So ones that are the norm are things like your white goods. So yes, you're a first-time buyer, you've been in rented, chances are the utilities you're living with belong to someone else, and that's the landlord, or your parents if you're living at home.
Of course, yeah.
So what we say is conditions can be elements like the white goods, your kitchen, fridge, freezer, dishwasher, washing machines and utility rooms, etc. So if your offer is on that basis as part of negotiation, you should certainly make that clear on the off to avoid then renegotiating further down the line, as that only puts in doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think clarity at the point of offer is critical, because obviously it comes back. Once the offer has been accepted, what would they expect? What would a buyer expect in terms of the process after that's been accepted?
I'd certainly say, first off, don't be daunted by the questions the agent asks you. You feel like they are quite intrusive. It's not. It's a huge transaction. You're buying an asset. We want to make sure that you have everything in place to make this a smoother and swifter journey as possible, because it's already quite a lengthy process. So they will ask you for, if you're buying cash, proof of funds. They want to see a statement. Please be upfront with that. We want to make sure that you have got that there. Or maybe your agreement in principle or mortgage offer. Or they'll ask you for your details of your financial advisor if you haven't quite got the paperwork for it, but they can validate your positioning. So that's the first things we're going to ask you. We'll then ask you for who you're going to instruct for the conveyancing. This should really be in the next 48 hours, 72 at the maximum, for you to do your research if you aren't going on with who we recommend, as to who you're going to instruct for the conveyancing.
So it's pretty good to actually do some pre-preparation in terms of what solicitors you wish to use, etc. Because of time's critical sometimes. And I guess the information you just provided forms the basis of a memorandum of sale, which is sent out to both parties, solicitors, etc.
Yes, that's what we put together, just so everybody knows who is involved in this chain, who the communications are going to be between for that section of the chain, if there's anyone else involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are useful tips. Thank you.
You're welcome.